Shakespeare. I'm Steph.
Yay!
This is Swan, and we sketch Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Heck yeah, we love Shakespeare too, faux facey. This stream brings me so much joy. When I say we sketch Shakespeare, I mean truly Swan sketches Shakespeare, and I talk a lot. So that's the dynamic of this stream. Buckle your boots, strap yourselves in, because today we're getting spoopy.
Yeah.
I realized, Swan,
Mm.
that we haven't done any Macbeth yet.
Ooh, okay.
Yep. So Macbeth is one of my favorite plays because it's like the least Shakespeare.
Okay.
And I obviously love Shakespeare, but like there's just something different about it. And I know it's a lot about like attributing pieces of it to different authors and all of that. It's shorter than most plays. It's snappier than a lot of plays. It's got bold lady character. And a lot of murder and witches.
Now, when was this released in his timeline, I guess?
I'm so happy you asked. It was later
Okay.
in his reign of playwriting. Let me pull up because I want to say it was like pretty close to the end. So 1606. This is obviously all of these are estimations of when they were written versus when they were first performed. So his first plays were in like 1590. So this was like, 15, 20 years into his writing, and only about 5-6 years before he died. So 10 years before he died, roughly. Exactly.
No, that's very cool. I always find it interesting, and obviously this is what I equate it to because it's the literature that I actually know decently well, but when you talk about Jane Austen and you talk about like Northanger Abbey, which is probably the spookiest one of the Austens, it was released much later, but it was written first. So it's funny because you can see the difference in the writing between that, even though when it was released, it doesn't make sense. So I'm always curious about that, especially with somebody like Shakespeare who just wrote a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah. Looking at the timeline or the estimated timeline of Shakespeare's writing is really fascinating. I think I've recommended this before on this stream, but Tina Packer wrote a book called Women of Will, and it examines his female characters through the kind of periods in which he was writing and how they developed and how they grew and how much more complex they became as his writing matured. And I just think it's one of the best pieces of Shakespeare criticism that I've ever read. And I definitely recommend it to everyone. Nice. And it kind of talks about the evolution of his strong female lead. The way that Lady Macbeth, it always makes me laugh when people are like, yeah, Macbeth is a feminist play because it has a strong female character. And I'm like, just because she has a decent number of lines doesn't make it a feminist play. Sorry to bother you, but she does a lot of murder and then disappears for the whole second half. Sorry. So yeah, I have a lot of strong thoughts on Macbeth. It's the play that I first realized I love Shakespeare because my 10th grade English teacher taught us the first act and then had a baby. So we got a short-term sub who taught us the first act of Macbeth. And then we got a long-term sub who taught us the first act of Macbeth. And then subsequently the other 4 acts. But it was like a straight month of Act 1 of Macbeth. And as kind of as little as it was, I was like, oh, I get this. Like, and it's kind of the plainest. I think it's one of the plainest plays as well, like in wording and verse. And so
Okay.
it's just straightforward. It makes sense to me. And I don't know if it's because of the time I spent on it or because I was a 10th grader and I was like, yeah, witches, magic, death, witches, magic, murder. Let's do some murder.
Also, I want that level of hype coming into something like that. We did not get that level of hype for Romeo and Juliet. But my 10th grade English teacher was so sassy and so sarcastic about it that was where I was like, oh, I actually really enjoy this. Not because I like love what's happening in the book, but I love how like upset you are at these teenage characters. Like, this is just delighting me so much. Like, same, really.
Honestly, when you teach high school, I feel like you understand Romeo and Juliet so much more deeply because all of your students are dummies, like rash, impulsive dummies, and they're so earnest about it.
Yes.
And so like you love them and you hate their bad decisions. And so I feel like it kind of like makes you really feel the play.
Yeah, no, there's a like hormonal teen understanding that I don't think could be more perfectly captured than high school romance.
Nope.
Oh, yeah.
No, ma'am. So I want to do witches today.
Yeah.
To really kick this off. So this is Act 4, Scene 1, and it's the cauldron scene. It's the one that probably everyone will be familiar with, double, toil and trouble. Yeah. And I was really excited to bring this one because like the idea of witches in Macbeth have been, you know, they have run the gamut, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, but like it's so open, like how you treat these witches, how you deal with them. For art, it's like, talk about a blank canvas for, you know, doing whatever you want to do with them. So I was excited to see what your interpretation of doing whatever you want to do with them is. So where is my window? There it is. One thing to point out is that every time the witches come on stage, it's either thunder or lightning or some sort of storm. So we get thunder. Thrice the brinded cat hath mewed, thrice and once the hedge pig whined. Harpier cries, 'tis time, 'tis time. Round about the cauldron go, in the poisoned entrails throw. Toad, that under cold stone days and nights has 31. Sweltered venom sleeping got, boil thou first in the charmed pot. Double, toil and trouble, fire burn in cauldron bubble. Fillet of a fenny snake in the cauldron boil and bake. Eye of newt and toe of frog, wool of bat and tongue of dog. Adder's fork and blind worm's sting, lizard's leg and howlet's wing. For a charm of powerful trouble, like a hell broth boil and bubble. Double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. Scale of dragon, tooth of wolf, witch's mummy, maw and gulf. Of the raven, salt sea shark, root of hemlock digged in the dark. Liver of blaspheming Jew, gall of goat and slips of yew, silvered in the moon's eclipse, nose of Turk and Tartar's lips, finger of birth strangled babe, ditch delivered by a drab, make the gruel thick and slab. Add thereto a tiger's chaudron for the ingredients of our cauldron. Double, toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble. Cool it with a baboon's blood, then the charm is firm and good.
Whoo boy.
Yep. So it's a lot, but like I kind of wanted to focus textually on more of like the rhythm.
Yeah.
Cuz one of my favorite things that Shakespeare does is change the speaking rhythm based on what type of character is talking. So for all of our, I think we touched upon this maybe in the first stream, but for all of his, you know, educated royal characters, we've got Iabic Pentameter, straightforward, 10 syllables, unstressed, stressed, alternating. For all of our uneducated clown characters, it's all in prose. So it's just, there's no meter, there's no rhythm. It just looks like paragraphs. And then for our magical characters, we get Trochaic Tetrameter, which is the opposite of an iamb. It's stressed then unstressed, and it's only 4 feet, so 8 syllables. So that double, we see instead of to be, double, like it flips the rhythm on its head.
Yeah. Oh, I dig that.
It's such a small subtle change. But when you hear a character flipping the rhythm, because right before this scene, what's the scene before this? Act 3, scene 6. Oh yeah, we are talking politics. So advise him to a caution to hold what distance his wisdom can provide. Some holy angel fly to the court of England and unfold his message ere he come, blah, 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 blah. And then we've got thrice the blinded cat hath mewed. It just like, there's something so subtle about it and so magical.
Yeah.
So whenever we've got a character that stresses first, you know there's a little bit of magic happening. Same with Puck in Midsummer. Through the forest I have gone, but Athenian found I none. So just, I don't know, it to me, a trochee hits you over the head a little bit more aggressively. Because that first syllable is stressed, we're just like coming out of the gate, hitting the word and taking the rhythm from there rather than kind of like swooping up into the rhythm.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
It does. No, and you could feel it.
Yeah. It's weird because I know that when you've like stared at rhythms for 15 years, of course they're obvious to me, but like I feel like you hear them even if you're not used to it, even if you can't identify what it is that's different.
Yes.
It's
very
just,
much
it
that.
changes.
Well, and it's a beautiful like musical feel. So I don't know if that's because I was in band, in chorus for a lot, so I have kind of the musical background or the dance thing, but like it's, as we've talked about many times, it's the thing that gets lost when you're reading it, at least for me, when I'm just reading it or I'm having someone read it aloud who isn't confident in it. And that's, again, it's the nature of reading it aloud in high school. But like it has a build, it has a feel to it. And it's cool because you have so much blending of like softer consonant sounds and then those hard like starts to words. And it just, yeah, it sounds visually cool. I don't know how to say that. Just like,
yeah. And Last Limey is absolutely right. It's much less noticeable on the page than it is on stage, which is Shakespeare in a nutshell.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't see it. Like you look at the word double, and then you look at the series of words like to be, and that's one of the things that so when I teach rhythm to my freshmen, typically we play hopscotch outside. We go outside. I draw like a little hopscotch board. It's not an exciting hopscotch board because it's just 1 foot 2 feet, 1 foot 2 feet, and I do essentially a line of iambic pentameter on the ground. And so seeing it that way, like it takes a while for kids to understand, and adults also if they're not used to it, to understand stressed syllables. We have what was it? Is it Austin Powers? The wrong syllable.
It's not, but it was him. It was some other crazy movie about airplanes that I did not pay attention to, but the trailer was, the emphasis on the wrong syllable, which is just, ugh, I hate it.
Right. And like it, you know it, but it's hard to identify. So if you're just looking at words, you're not going to be like, oh, this is obviously trochaic. And so like getting kids to look at stress syllables is always a challenge. But I'll use music a lot. Like you said, it is so inherently musical. And they always lose their minds when I tell them that Taylor Swift's Shake It Off is an iambic pentameter.
Oh my gosh, I could just see. Yes, Faux Facey is right. It was the one with Gwyneth Paltrow.
Up in
for
the
the
air?
movie. Yeah. I always think of the one that is George Clooney and Anna Kendrick, which has a very similar name to that, but is not that movie. So, yeah.
I don't think I've seen Up in the Air. I just have just seen that clip
Yep.
of
Yep.
That's wild. So yeah, when I stand up and I'm like, but I keep cruising, can't stop, won't stop grooving. And all the kids are like, I'm sorry, what? Excuse you? It's just oh, it's A View from the Top.
Okay.
I've never seen that either. So yikes. My movie education just expanded though. But yeah, so looking at stress, looking at syllables is always like a really kind of time, not a time suck, but it's something that I spend a lot of time on with my kids so that they can understand it and feel it and hear it. And then, like Faux Facey says, throw it out the window. Because there's nothing worse. Well, I mean, there are worse things, but if you're sitting there and watching an actor say, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer, like it just. But soft with light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Julia is the sun.
I hate it.
Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon. And obviously, that's like a wild over exaggeration, but like you want to respect the meter without, I don't know the word I'm looking for, without like just
Staying true to it, but not stripping it of all of its enthusiasm.
yeah, or natural.
Yeah,
pace.
I think there's a fear of deviating so much from this tempo that it's supposed to be that you then don't get to add any personalization to it. And I think the personalization part is where the magic actually happens, because you can put your own pauses in and do that little bit, and you get to play with this rhythm and tempo very much like dance, where you're just like, no, this is the rough outline, and we always use 4/4 counts, but where you choose to put pauses in that 4/4 count will change how it ends up looking or how it ends up sounding.
Yeah. I always am very envious of actors who, I work with a lot of actors who are not Shakespearean scholars in any way, have never done Shakespeare before, have never read Shakespeare before, and we're doing a Shakespeare play. And I'm always a little envious of, and this is Mike especially is really good at this, making it sound like a normal person in the year of our Lord 2021 having a conversation. Because I walk the middle ground of like meter, like using meter and naturalizing. But there's always something that I'm a little too stuck in the text. Like I feel like as an actor, I'm a little too stuck on the page to really like free myself from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just a product of like having read it so many times.
Yeah.
Too many times. Yeah, I think this is an interesting point from Lost Limey, that Shakespeare practically demands declamation. I can rarely recognize meter when written, but it can always tell when it sounds wrong. Yeah. And that's part of, why it's so important to me to teach, so that you know what's right, and then you can use that. Because like when you say, but soft, what light through yonder window breaks? Like, again, we're not always hammering the syllables that much, but like, when it's off, you're going to feel when it's wrong. And then that just like, you can play with that. I think if you are a skilled and thoughtful enough actor, I think you can play with that discomfort. And I think Hamlet is one of those plays that you can really use that discomfort to your advantage to make the audience uncomfortable.
Well, and I feel like with Hamlet too, it's that much better because so Romeo and Juliet, to me at least, that one's a little bit more heartbreaking, obviously tragedy, but you feel for these characters because they are young and dumb and they do dumb things. Whereas I feel like there's a more adult problem to Hamlet. And so like you can be a little bit spookier, you can be a little bit more intense, and it doesn't feel like you're killing children. So I think like you can really lean into making the audience discomfort more prevalent in that show just for the nature of the show. Whereas, Romeo and Juliet on the surface, like, no, it's already going to be uncomfortable because shit's going to go real bad.
Yep. Spoiler alert. Talking about being uncomfortable and killing children. Macbeth. Macbeth is, I think, one of my favorite plays I've ever directed because I felt like I had directed a couple before this, but I didn't really feel like I was a director until Macbeth, because I didn't know what I was doing. No idea what I was doing. And with this, I felt like I had ideas and I felt like I had a direction. And one of my favorite things that I did was we had a couple kids in the cast whose siblings had been in Romeo and Juliet, and they were like, we want to do Shakespeare. And I was like, you're 5. And they came to auditions and they were like, I can die standing up or sitting down. And I was like, hell yeah, you're 5 years old and want to be part of a Shakespeare play. This is literally the best day of my life. So there's a lot of killing and a lot of death in Macbeth. And we found this like kind of lullaby. All 3 of my witches were singers.
Ooh.
Yeah, so we found this lullaby type song. It was like really haunting and really pretty. And so when Banquo dies, they sang it from off stage. And I had Fleance, Banquo's little boy, come back on stage and like do like a, Simba Mufasa. Dad? Like it was my goal was essentially to make the audience lose their minds crying, and it worked. So then when the next death was Duncan. No, the first death was Duncan. They didn't sing for that. The next death was Banquo and they sang off stage. There was another time they sang it, but I can't remember because it was 10 years ago. But then when we had them kill the Macduff children, we had 4 and 5-year-olds running around the stage being murdered on stage. And Lady Macduff, as she's watching her children, this is really dark, so content warning, it's really awful. She starts singing this same lullaby that the witches had been singing, like as she's watching her children, and then like she dies and the witches pick it up off stage. So they like finish the melody from it, and then the scene ends, and all I can remember is the whole audience just going,
oh, that's such a good feeling as a director. Oh, that's like, so good.
Awful, but Macbeth is awful.
Yeah,
like it's a terribly gruesome play. And this comment makes me laugh so hard. Burnhamwood, more of a shrubbery. So it's funny because these little kids were on stage for one scene, the Macduff scene, and they were so eager to be part of it that our Burnham Wood was basically, we had baskets full of leaves. And so Malcolm and friends came from the back of the audience. Your leafy screens throw down, and we kind of just showered the audience with leaves, with like tree leaves, to give the same. Just like, I didn't have the budget for trees. I had the budget for tears, but not for full-on trees coming in. And the kids were like, we'll pick up the leaves every night. We'll go around the whole theater. We'll pick up all the leaves. And I was like,
oh my gosh.
Well, I'm not going to say no to that. So
Yeah.
every night they were going around with their little baskets picking up leaves from the
I love it so much.
But yeah, I love Macbeth because it has a lot of room for originality, I guess. There have been a million Macbeths on film and a million different interpretations of the witches especially. So let's take a look. Swan. Oops, that's not what I wanted. That's what I wanted.
Very
Let's take
rough.
a look at what we're doing.
They're rough figures at this point, but yeah, I don't know. Like for me, I know it's very cliche, but I just want like big flowing robes. Like that's just fun to play with. It's fun to draw. Cloaks are fun to draw. And I just like the element. Honestly, a lot of what Elizabeth Olsen ended up doing with Scarlet Witch, like I love like weird, like hand type magic. I just think looks really cool. So I want to highlight that. But I also want this like draw you in and movement to it. So I want them to almost be kind of moving around the cauldron. I want them to almost be dancing with it because the tempo made me think of movement and made me think of like the camera switching between each of them as they're saying their parts of the spell. And I know I've been working in like navies and blues for all of these, but honestly, I feel like I need to switch this over because now in my brain, all I can think of is lime green and black and purple because that's that's the color that this says to me because it is ominous and you always see it in like Be Prepared, in Lion King, you see it in Maleficent, like you just, that's the color that this needs to be because that's what's happening. So I might get to play with color a little bit more than I usually do just because I feel like that needs to be a fun thing. But
I also really like how they're like obscured and blurred and then it kind of like sharpens into focus.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So we've got, let's see in chat, Maiden. Oh, first of all, I had no idea that Tolkien included the Ents because he was disappointed that Birnam Wood walking wasn't literal. That is something I've never heard before, and it has blown my mind.
That's cool.
You have blown my brain wide open, and I love that. I'm obsessed with that. But a lot of times we'll see Maiden Mother Crone for the witches, and I was in a production of Macbeth 2 years ago at this point. Yeah, I guess 2 years ago. Time has no meaning anymore.
No, time makes no sense.
And it was very very much the Maiden Mother Crone. My brain's gone.
Dynamic?
I want dynamic. Yeah, I wanted to say trope, which I guess works. But I was the maiden.
Ooh.
But it was funny because it worked really. It was really cool how we could find justification for those roles in the text. Like I feel like when you read the witches' lines plain, like when you just read them straightforward, they seem very on an even footing. They seem very on par with each other. But like when you adopt these tropes or these types, archetypes, I guess is a better word than tropes, the lines just kind of start opening up new avenues of discovery for you, which I think is very cool and very something that Shakespeare is always going to offer. Is a different interpretation based on the way that you've decided to play a character. And I don't know, Lost Lamey, if the Maiden Mother Crone originated with the fates of Greek myth or from some other source. I only know its Wiccan origins. I don't know if I've ever read the fates as a Maiden Mother Crone trio, or it's just like I feel like I've always gravitated towards crone trio.
Yeah.
But that's also the media I've been exposed to from that. So yeah. Other ways that witches have been portrayed, like I said, there are a million Macbeths, and some of my favorites include, if you've ever seen Scotland, PA, it is like I think 60s, 60s or 70s, but it's fast food. So it's like a fast food rivalry. Christopher Walken as Duncan gets murdered in the fry oil.
Oh my gosh.
And Andy Dick is one of the witches.
What?
And they're like, the witches are like, they're like at a carnival. They're like at an abandoned carnival. Like it's it is wild. I highly recommend it. Heck yeah, Faux Facey has seen it. I love Scotland, PA. I was like, oh, this is the Macbeth that I would show my students if it didn't say, fuck 1,000 times.
Right.
Which it does. I'll get to my beef with Macbeth in a few minutes. Then we've got the Sam Worthington Macbeth from Australia that has the witches as like very promiscuously dressed schoolgirls.
Oh,
then
sure.
We have the Patrick Stewart, kind of, what is it, Cold War-ish Macbeth with the witches as nurses. You've got the Roman Polanski, which is kind of very earthy, natural, naked, elemental witches.
Mm-hmm.
When I directed it, they were seasons. They had like kind of gowns on, dressed as the seasons, which was cool. I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
So it was,
I think that's
summer, winter, and fall. Summer, fall, and winter. And then when Hecate came in, my Hecate was an 8-year-old girl who was incredible to watch her come out and just like scold these witches like a boss. And so she was spring, and it was awesome.
That's
I thought
so cool.
But yeah, witches are so, it feels like when you're gonna direct Macbeth, your challenge is how do I theme these witches? Like, what do I do with the witches? What do I do with magic? Yeah, Polanski is a bad person. And that's the end of that. I don't think, and I would love to hear from all y'all watching, I don't think that a version of Macbeth exists I don't think that a version of Macbeth exists that is perfect for a high school classroom. So my whole master's dissertation was Shakespeare on film for the 21st century student, looking at the lenses of race, gender, and violence. And I think that Macbeth is this problem film or problem play, because if you modernize it to make it kind of like more accessible to a modern audience, every time a director does that, it's all about drugs and sex. Everyone's doing it. Lady Macbeth and Macbeth are just doing it every 5 minutes. And the drug content is also too high for a sophomore class or whatever.
Yeah.
Too high for me to feel comfortable keeping my job. Or they go very classic, like the what's his nuts? What's his name? Swan. It's recent.
Joss Whedon?
Famous and hot. No.
Oh, I was gonna say
he did a
director's
much ado.
Yeah, I was gonna say for performing.
Fassbender. Michael Fassbender.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't even get through the first 10 minutes of it because I was so bored.
Oh no.
I was so bored. It was so boring.
Interesting.
So I feel like when directors go really period with it, it falls into that trap of like, and when they go period with it, they don't cast any women or people of color because they're like, it's period. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So that's my challenge. Somebody give me a film Macbeth or several $1 million to make my own.
Well, and just so strange to me that it's something where it is a piece of literature that you're going to teach in school. And honestly, there was a lot of stuff that we read in school that was very mature for what we were doing. Like, and some of the stuff I was just like, oh, my 16-year-old brain can't handle this right now. But such a weird, different thing when it's translated to a movie or TV show type medium. Like, it just, there's some of it that just hits so much harder, even though it's the same material.
Yes. Yeah. And like, I feel like Shakespeare kind of gets a free pass for content because people are like, oh, it's Shakespeare, it's literature, it's classical literature. And you're like, oh yeah, but there's a lot of stuff happening here that if this were in modern English would not be allowed on the book list.
Yeah.
I love this idea that your screw your courage to the sticking place and will not fail can be so motivating and nice when it's motivating your partner to do something wholesome and good. Lady Macbeth is a terrible person who has some of the most incredible lines in all of drama ever.
So I say it because I've not actually watched any of Game of Thrones. I know little bits about it, but from what little I know of Game of Thrones and Macbeth, I just want Lena Headey to play her because I feel like she's got that like stone cold queen feel to her, and also like I can play a really horrendous person who like I want to see bad things happen to, but I'm also kind of rooting for you because you deliver these lines with such gusto. Like I'm very torn, but I just want to keep watching.
You know who my dream Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are? Everyone in chat is going to be like, excuse you?
No.
The first one's obvious. The first one, I think everyone will understand my choice of man. And I need David Tennant to play Macbeth.
Oh, yeah.
He's literally Scottish. He's perfect. And then for Lady Macbeth, stay with me, y'all. I want Sofia Vergara to play Lady Macbeth. I want David Tennant and Sofia Vergara, a traditionally comic duo. They're two actors who are so well skilled in comedy that I feel like the problem with most Macbeths that I watch is like the Macbeths are the most popular family in the entire world right now. Everyone loves the Macbeths. He's the best fighter. He's everyone's best friend. He's like, everyone loves Lady Macbeth. They're so popular. But we always see them as like dark and reserved from the beginning. And I just want them to be so gregarious and so charming and so like funny and engaging. That like then as those seeds, because they're also both really good nuanced actors, it makes the transition hit even harder. So
all right,
that's my wish.
I mean, as we're pretty much going to say every time we do one of these, it's always going to be David Tennant. Like
always
whichever character he's playing, he's just first cast. And we'll figure it out. We'll figure out the rest from there.
We're talking about the patriarchy, Bean. As usual, we're talking as typically happens in these monthly streams. We're talking about burning down the patriarchy. We're actually not even talking about we're not even doing a Lady Macbeth scene today. We're talking about the witches, but yes, there's so much about Lady Macbeth's lines and that are mirrored with Beatrice that are, so that really are really thoughtful frustrations with the society they live in. Nah, Bean, you should absolutely be here. We love you.
Heck yeah.
So yeah, I just love the room that Macbeth affords for originality and creativity, and also music, because whenever you have witches, you got room for music. This is cool. I really love the green
Thanks.
and
Yeah.
the purple.
It just works in my brain. It's one of those where I was like, well, it has to be this because this is what you would have.
Now, looking at the middle panel here, like
Mhm.
the middle row of 3. And in the middle, is that each of the 3 of them? Like 1, 2, 3?
Yeah.
How do you, when you've got 3 different characters, what's your like differentiation goal? Like, how do you decide on either different personalities or different like presentations or you know, literal shapes? Like, what goes through your mind when you're looking at a trio?
So a bunch of things. Personality is a big part of it. It's thank you, Faux Facey. And part of it, especially at this point, because I know that I'm going to have them all moving around the page a bunch and I want to keep that movement going. I need them to be different enough from each other so that the viewer is never confused about who is in which place. So that could be different costuming. If I wanted to, I do kind of want to play with the maid, the mother, and the crone type thing, but I almost want to do it more in possibly how they are using their body language. So I kind of like the idea with the one in the middle being the crone, where she's constantly just hiding her face, and that type of thing, so that it's just that part is hidden. And then you've got one, I always think of the maid as the one with the cloak covered because she would be covered as the maid. So then that leaves the other one. So I like that. Also, I want their body language to speak to that. So obviously they're walking, they're very, in my brain, they're very regal. They're very like, you've got the cloak trailing behind you, which just feels so cool. But I still want that personality and body shape to work through. Also, because again, like I've been doing lately, I'm working with such a limited color palette. So it's not like one will be red, one will be blue, and one will be green. They are all going to kind of be this weird purple color. So I have to rely then on how their body language and their shapes work differently. And to keep kind of this ominous, because I want to play with the lighting so much, you've got the center light coming from the cauldron. So everything else is going to fade out. It's also, thunder and lightning. So you're not getting as much regular lighting, like a regular scene. So playing with that and how that's going to react to the characters. But the biggest thing, and I think this comes from the animation side of it, we talk a lot about silhouette. Yeah. So when you are animating, you need a clear silhouette. That's how you show clear action, even with a static character that's not moving. So the silhouettes need to be clear enough that you can still tell there's 3 humans around a cauldron. But then you can also take it a step further where you can tell that there are this person, and this person around the cauldron. And it's not just amorphous shapes. Also, because I don't know how much I'm going to focus on their faces, you're not going to have that as a visual cue to the audience. So yeah, all different things, which if you're casting 3 different actors, very, very easy, because they're all going to look differently, even if they're costumed the same. But yeah, with drawing, trying to still keep them in the visual that I want, but have them differentiated enough to have the audience not have to work hard to figure out who is who.
Yeah. Well, this again, as always, is magic to me. And just the idea in that middle panel, like my eye keeps getting drawn to that middle panel, like with the sleeves, like doing this, because it's so I don't want to use the word confusing, because I think that sounds negative, but I don't know the right word for it, but it's just like is so mysterious, engaging. Like I want to look at that. Like I want to look at that panel. Like my eye is drawn there and I want to stay there. And I think if you're using that kind of maiden, mother, crone, intriguing. Yeah. Thank you, Mayor Squish. Not confusing. Confusing such a like
dude, words are hard.
Right
yeah,
now.
Words are hard.
And if you're looking at that like trio dynamic, there's almost always going to be one in charge, right? You're never going to have a perfectly balanced trio. And so it draws power. and you're like, that's the one I'm going to keep my eye on, where that like power is coming from. And there's so much, like, as an actor, I feel so much of that position in my body, and keeping her face hidden is like also super cool. I don't know, I just like, that's where
Yay!
my eye keeps zooming in.
Well, that's awesome. And it's a big important thing, because as we've talked about for many weeks, it's all about drawing the viewer's eye through the page and bringing them to certain points. And what do I want to highlight? And what do I want you to take away from this page? You know, even if you scan it quickly and you're not inspecting each panel for each piece of art, what do you take away when you turn to the next page? And I like that idea. And I mean, again, anything with the long, like, arms of a cloak and stuff like that. It's again, as we've talked many weeks, it's literally just, I draw this because this makes me happy. So
it makes me happy too. I also love the close up on their hands. And I want to hear a little bit more about that. But like, for me, when I look at that as someone who doesn't know anything, I still see individualized character in the way that they're holding their hands, but it becomes more of just like this is a unified magic. Like, when you've got close up, you don't see their bodies, you don't see their faces, you don't see their, costumes even. They're still individual personality, but it's just 6 hands or whatever, it's all more unified.
Yes, because I imagine with this, like, they draw some of their power because they are the trio. It's working through the coven aspect of it. So while you are each contributing something separate, you still are drawing on power from your collective group.
Yeah. And when you have all lines, like the double, toil, and trouble, it gives a really nice break for having a panel like that. Because if I were going to be captioning this, I obviously, like, for the whole long page that I read of it, it would be, longer or more, but like, you have each individual witch gives their own list of ingredients into the cauldron, but then you have every section has a unifying moment. So whether it's going around the cauldron or their hands in, or this really cool little bit that we can see on the bottom, like, you've got those breaks where everyone's in unison.
Yeah.
And I think unison speech is really cool because I'm obsessed with voices. I just love how, like, even with, it's almost like harmony.
Yes.
You have 3 actors with 3 distinct voices. It can either be really jarring dissonance or a really beautiful harmony. And I think that depending on the time you have with your actors, and the, skills that they have with vocal modulation, it can be very, very cool to make it disjointed or to make it more harmonious. Look at that. One of us has 2 degrees in English. Whew, any more caffeine. But yeah, it was really hard for me when I was playing the maiden, which they kept trying to direct my pitch up, which for me is really, really hard. Because you are listening to my voice. It is not a feminine register conventionally.
Yeah, weird. I can't relate.
That's why I love you, because I feel like we're on this like cool. That's why I feel like we could do like a, after dark talk show.
Yes.
Like, that level of chill. Except we're both way too nerdy to like keep ourselves at that level.
I was gonna say, and it's so funny, and I think I've talked about this on my own art stream, when I get really excited, because you can literally hear the pinch in my vocal folds as I get really excited and my voice gets really high. But it's less like, that's not feminine, that's like cartoon character. Like, I'm just that excited. Which is not where my voice normally
right.
So.
This is a super interesting point from Lost Limey. The more antagonistic you portray the witches, the less harmonious you'd want them to seem. And I think that's a really cool point, and not something I've actually thought I've thought about this play a lot, y'all. Like an obsessive amount. And I don't know if I've ever really harped on like the witches being antagonists, protagonists, or just like straight up antagonists. Is there a word for like is there a word for just plot? Like because there's I think where I would put them, which I wouldn't know the term for, but I would put them in the amoral category.
That feels right.
My undergrad dissertation, it will surprise no one, was about witches. It was about Morgause in the Arthurian legend, Morgana, Morgause, whatever kind of version you're reading, and how she's not evil, she's certainly not good, but she is amoral. She acts for her own benefit, and doesn't regard a set of kind of natural morality laws. They just don't really exist to her. She doesn't care, and how that impacts the entire, legend. And I think that's where I'd put these witches, because they're not necessarily doing good. I feel like they have a perspective on a person like Macbeth to know that encouraging him or like delivering these prophecies, like they sought him out. So there has to be a purpose to that. But they're also not evil, because they're not making him do murder. They're not saying, Macbeth, go murder everyone. They're saying, like, here's what's going to happen if you do. Here's what's going to happen if you don't. Or, like, they're, like, giving scenarios, making promises without actually telling him. They just said, you'll be king. They didn't say, murder Duncan and you'll be king. So, like, they're not evil. They're not good. Ooh, Mayor Squish coming in. Deuteragonists. This is a new word for me, and I'm so excited. Usually allies and sidekicks that have their own separate storylines. I think that fits perfectly. I think that neither ally nor sidekick really works for the witches, but I think that they have their own separate storyline, and they impact the play in the same way a sidekick might, delivering, I don't know. They're like giving Macbeth information, right?
Well, so again, this is going to show my ignorance for the play, but for them, do they have their own like story arc? Is there something like their beginning, middle, and end to it? Because I feel like a sidekick, like you are still there through all the adventure, even though you're not a main focus, but you don't necessarily get your hero's journey or villain's journey or any of that. You just kind of move along with the journey of the play.
Yeah, they have a little bit of their own kind of thing where their boss comes in and yells at them. Like Boss Witch comes in and is like, what the hell were you thinking? And they're like, sorry. But that's kind of it.
Well, and also and I don't know if this is just because I've been watching a lot of Loki lately, but I love the Agent of Chaos thing. So as these witches, you are essentially burdened with power, and you can take that however you want. So do you play with the other people who don't play on your level? Do you mess with them? Do you guide them? How do you balance this, you not being on the same level as them?
How do you indeed? Glorious purpose.
Glorious purpose. Also, again, coming back to that green. It's just the thing. It's just the color.
Yeah, there's something about green and purple. And I don't know if it just was ingrained by Disney for all of us, with the Evil Queen, with Maleficent.
Yep.
Maybe it's just like we've been conditioned by Disney to I guess Ursula's purple.
Yep. And
We've
when she does
got
her magic, there's some green to it. Yep.
yeah. I
Yeah.
did a whole lesson on color theory in Disney with my freshman this year.
Yes.
It was really fun. I didn't realize how many Disney princesses wear blue to subvert traditional gender norms. Never crossed my mind to think of it that way, but
Well,
thanks, YouTube.
it's also interesting because you'll see like old school comic book characters, because the printing of comic books had a limited color profile. Like, so many of them are super bright and super colorful, and there are a ton of characters that are green and purple. And it's just funny that I think even though they are not strictly complementary colors, they just work together to give you a very specific emotion.
Yeah, and I think this is a great point that again I never would have thought of because I don't know anything about art, but like heroes getting primary colors while villains get secondary.
Yep.
And is that something that you consciously, like when you draw or when you use color, when you choose color? I guess how do you choose color is more of the question that I want to know.
Well, that's a scary question for me because I am not a confident colorist. I think I really like the way I pencil. I'm okay with the way I ink. I like the way I storyboard. I don't feel as confident picking colors for a scene because I think in my brain I know how powerful they are, and I just don't see it as clearly as I do. Like so as you're reading to me, I'm getting panels in my head. I'm getting layout in my head. I'm starting to see how the characters move around in this theater of my brain. But that doesn't always then translate to color for me. I like with this one, it did because it's, it's the green and purple. So that was an easy one. But a lot of the time it doesn't. Like for, we'll say the meeting in the woods where we did King Oberon and Titania.
Mm-hmm.
I saw them at dusk in the moonlight, I think partially because it was a cool ambiance, but also because at that point color gets super desaturated. So I'm playing also, as you've seen with all of these, I play off of one color because then it's a focus on the storytelling, and I don't have to also then worry about the color theory of it, because bad coloring can pull you out of a story. You can have beautifully illustrated art, and if the color just doesn't match, it makes the art feel flat, and it also changes the tone of the scene. But you'll have the same page like colored by somebody else, and it's a whole different scene. Like it's that much more serious, or it's that much more light, and I feel bad because I feel like colorists get the least amount of credit, possibly them and letterers. But I went to, because I'm a huge nerd, I went to a very specific colorist panel at a Comic-Con once, and it was 5 artists who I adore, and they just nerded out about coloring. But they took all the same page and they each colored it on their own.
Oh,
And
so
each
cool.
page was totally different, and it talked about how they did. And it's bittersweet to me now because one of the guys on there was a man named Justin Ponzer, who I think is one of the most sensational colorists, who actually passed away within the last couple of years. And it was so weird to me because like what he would do for comics, I noticed, and I could pick out his art because it just elevated every part of it. And while celebrity deaths don't usually affect me that much, that one really got to me because I knew him as a human. I'd met him, I'd talked to him, I'd listened to him talk about color theory, and all of a sudden, like, there was this weird, like, vacuum of, oh, but he's not going to be coloring these books anymore. And, like, he's not bringing his magic to it. And, like, felt like we had lost some magic. And I know that got real sad.
No,
but
there's like, if there's a certain eye and like a certain style that you're used to seeing, and then especially because like in comics, like you've talked about the kind of the legacy of different styles, and someone else having to take over that, like does the person taking over try to mimic
exactly. So
or try to make it their own?
right. And a lot of them, again, that's where you get into how Marvel handles comics versus how like DC has a house style. And you come in and you continue to do it in this style that they have set up, which is totally fine. And if that's what you want to do, absolutely. And if you have the skill to draw or color that way, that's absolutely very cool. But I tend to lean more towards the other ones who are doing weirder or less traditional stuff because I think it's more fun from a visual
So
medium.
that's interesting to me. So you're saying DC has a house style. So all of their comics are in the same general
A lot of them.
style of okay.
Yep.
And then does Marvel change like issue to issue or superhero to superhero? Like how does that
title
work?
to title. Yes, definitely
Okay.
title to title.
That's
So
superhero to superhero.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Sorry.
But no, you're fine. But even so much as so with something like Spider-Man, you have Ultimate Spider-Man, you have Avenging Spider-Man, you have Amazing Spider-Man, you have regular Spider-Man, you've got Miles Morales. So they might do it different per book with that.
Okay.
But
So
for
title
that,
to title makes more
um,
clearer.
but with something, this is cool. So books that I was really, really excited about and was collecting actively. So when Ms. Marvel was first coming out, when Squirrel Girl was first coming out, those were a little bit more youthful and fun and energetic. So the artists and the colors that they got reflected that.
Okay.
Whereas you would say, so maybe some of the X-Men book, especially like Ultimate X-Men, which is a little bit more mature, that had a much more like painterly style. So it would be a lot darker and it wouldn't have as hard like black outlines like a cartoon would. It would be this more kind of like serious feel to it.
Yeah.
And feel is the best way that I can say it because it just, not only do they look different, but it makes you feel different. So, if you've got Wolverine in the X-Men, which was much more like jokes and funny and humor as well as, serious things versus like all the adult X-Men dealing with adult X-Men problems. Like those two books felt very different and it was good on them because they picked the people who helped to give you that feeling even if you weren't conscious of it.
I think that's really cool. I would probably and maybe this is colored by the fact that I prefer Marvel movies to DC movies in general, but I feel like I would prefer different styles title to title.
Yes.
Rather than something feeling so almost corporate.
Yes. And I think you've got something like Green Lantern where there's a whole bunch of them, but those always feel very similar to me, which is funny because in my brain, Green Lantern has much more kind of, it's not magic, but it's got more crazy space stuff like the Guardians do, but it still feels appropriately DC restrained. So it's a weird thing, but it's also, you're looking at these characters that have been around now for so many years and have gone through so many stories, making the decision, where do you keep everybody in the same continuity? Do you allow multiverse? All of these crazy decisions going into it. So much.
I love that. Y'all, I'm going to take a real quick break. I will hop back in just a few minutes.
Yeah. Chat, if you have questions for me or yes, anything about the art or what I'm doing, absolutely drop them in chat. I'm going to try and talk through what I am doing. I'm trying to fix this hand right now is really what I'm doing. Let's see. I'm keeping it. Hi, Mayor Squish. Thanks for hanging out. I'm so happy to be drawing comics. It brings me joy. And witches are never not fun. Certain brushes for hair. Yes and no. So for Facey, I will get super, super technical with you for a second. So from my background, I come from animation first and then comic books second. So my degree is in animation. So I was always of the trying to simplify things as much as I possibly can because I need to draw it over and over and over again. So Procreate has some really cool stuff. I've actually been playing with that this past week because I was teaching a digital art camp. So for me, I was looking for anything. Yes, Mayor Squish, exactly that. So if I just have, I'm just going to draw a real quick character here. So for me, when I'm thinking about hair, I'm thinking about hair in these chunks of it. So then I can go back in, I can add like a shine to it and more detail, but I'm thinking about it as chunked pieces, even as like a ponytail or something like that. So I can separate it more if I need to, but I'm starting it as a full chunk of hair is the best way I can say it. So for me, I also work a lot with, when it comes to hair, I want pen pressure. So pen pressure for the digital medium that I'm working with now means that if I have my brush, so if I make my brush really big and I draw really lightly and then I press down, it changes just like you would get with a marker. So I love that when it comes to drawing hair, because it feels like it has more movement. So I get that flow, and I can get a really thin line up there for some of the, we'll say the spot right around where the ponytail connects, but then I can also get this great like swoop of a ponytail in there and just keep these movement lines. So for me, full facey, I lean more into, I want to keep the movement of the hair, but I also don't want to have to draw 1,000 strands. So I will simplify it as much as I can to still get the look that I'm looking for. I think there are some brushes in the inking brush category specifically that have a little bit of that play to them, more than like the pencil drawing part. Go. Here's my my quick tutorial on hair.
I love that.
But yeah, pen pressure is a huge thing. I utilize that so much. It's cool because it is quote unquote mimicking what would be like a traditional medium, but it is not really anything like that because I ink and paint very differently than I draw digitally. But the idea makes sense. It sounds really weird, but yeah, I just like drawing witches. It's very fun. I'm also thinking of the witches from the Shakespeare episode of Doctor Who, because we talked about 10.
Yes. So. Yeah, she kind of looks like the
Yep. I was like, we'll just lean into that because she did a good job.
Well, and that's a good, like, pretty good example. I mean, it's kind of crone and maiden. Mm-hmm. But you still have that bit of balance. How do you approach like just witches in general or magic in general? Because I think it's so easy to be like, oh, witches are ugly, or like witches are old and ugly, or witches are young and beautiful. Like it feels like such a binary for witches, and that it makes no logical sense.
No, it really doesn't. And something I think that's cool about art is subverting expectations when it comes to characters. But to a certain extent, and this gets into a weird thing when I talk about, so follow me on this very winding path of my brain right now.
All right, strapped in.
So when I'm designing logos, certain fonts, certain colors, certain styles say certain things without the words at all. So I designed a logo recently for a farm, and I picked very specific, like older, almost looked like either hammered tin or a carved woodblock print. That was the font that I was going with. It went to very specific things, and I picked a very specific distressed looking font, color, all of that, because that reads farm and that reads farmer's market. Mm-hmm. And does it have to? Absolutely not. You could do something that was much more modular, much more modern, and still have it work. But there's a weird disconnect in your brain because you were so used to seeing farm logos that look this certain way. So there's kind of a balance of, all right, so we're expecting witches to either be old crones or hot, sexy ladies. So how do we kind of have that, but then also play with it a little bit?
Old, sexy ladies.
Old sexy ladies.
Yes. I do actually. I want to see old sexy ladies. No, that's interesting because for casting, I feel like I feel like you either cast young sexy ladies and make them old and ugly, or I don't know. There's so much room for exploration that I mean, if you've ever watched this stream before, you know how I feel about Shakespeare casting practices. Yeah. Oh yeah, I want Helen Mirren. Dude. Who's another old sexy lady? Old sexy lady.
Meryl Streep.
What is going to happen on my search here? Old sexy ladies.
Yeah, say Helen Mirren, Meryl Streep. Oh, I'd see Sigourney Weaver for something like this. I don't want to consider her old, but like these women who just have this great power to them.
Yeah.
So
I won't call Emma Thompson old yet, but she is a sexy lady.
she is a sexy lady. She would also be dope at this. I'd watch her be a witch. Oh,
Yeah.
Michelle Pfeiffer, who played a witch in Stardust,
Jane
gorgeously.
Fonda.
Jane Fonda would be good.
Yeah. Oh man. This is good
This
casting.
is a good coven.
With Sofia Vergara and David Tennant as McFadden.
I would watch the shit out of this. So
yeah.
Yep.
Give me $1 million. What's up, raging lady boner?
Hi, RLB. Welcome.
Who's Juliette?
Yeah. So some part of that too, when it comes to designing characters, especially when it comes to magic users, for me on the art end of it, I would want to know what type of magic they do and how they cast. So how they actually. So I always go to D&D. Like I'm gonna draw an aggressive like tiefling wizard different than I would draw a druid. And so because the way that they cast magic, the way that they interact with magic is different. So that means you get to play with a different character. And I think that's part of the fun for playing in this character building world. Like if I have free reign to design the characters as is, like I want to hear the person talking to me about them. Like, tell me about this character. How do they cast magic? What is their interaction with magic? Because that's going to change their physical traits if you're letting me just build a character from that.
I love what you just said, but also I need to call attention to the fact that I had no idea Cicely Tyson died this January.
Oh.
I love her so much. And I wanted to put her in my coven of witches, and now I'm sad. But talk about sexy old lady. I mean, I guess this is sad. This made me sad now.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, yes, going back to your excellent point about looking at the way magic is cast, I think is really cool. And I also think it's something that is like a unique D&D perspective. And honestly, the Shakespeare/D&D crossover is way bigger than I ever could have like expected. When I was just a Shakespeare person, I feel like I knew nothing about D&D. I had never played D&D. I didn't know anyone who played D&D really, or like actively. And then when Mike and Anthony asked me to be on the podcast, I was like, well, I guess I play D&D now. And all of a sudden, I'm like, everyone I know who loves Shakespeare also loves D&D. It's such a huge crossover. And yeah, like Last Limey says, like literary nerds like role-playing, who'd have thunk it? I didn't. I wouldn't have. But now that I see it, I'm like, well, yes, that's clearly the most obvious crossover imaginable.
Well, again, I think that all comes from, we'll say, from stigma of, and I love it because Mike literally talked about it on DC Digital Media this morning. But when you say D&D people to other friends who don't play, there's an instant image of the kind of person who plays D&D. You talk about what your brain goes to because of what you've been socialized to think.
Yeah.
So I think if you are someone who reads a ton of fantasy or even just reads a ton, for some reason that they never got lumped in with the kids who were the D&D people because somehow those people didn't read as much, which is bonkers to me because if you've ever seen the Player's Handbook, there's so much reading. So I don't know why like that was always like, well, the literary kids are separate from the D&D kids. I'm like, yeah. They shouldn't be, though.
They sure shouldn't be.
They sure shouldn't be.
I've always thought Macbeth plays out really nicely like a D&D game. And I would like to see it kind of I don't know how meta it could get, and I would be willing to play with it. Someone give me money. But like, you know, oh no, Duncan is dead. What? And it's like roll for performance check, and Lady Macbeth just like nails, or like roll for persuasion, and Lady Macbeth is just like hitting nat 20s left and right. Scots and Slaughters is so good.
Yes, Randy, that's so good. Oh my god.
I started last year trying to create a Shakespeare RPG. I'm sure one exists, but I was going to make my own because I'm stubborn and a control freak. So I was going to make, like the different classes are like, um, you know, royalty versus clown versus lover versus whatever. And then give different like stat boosts to, villain has a charisma stat boost. Like they're all smooth talkers. Well, not all of them, but some of them. And I was gonna make up the whole RPG, and then I just didn't because it's hard.
It's a lot of work.
Falstaff would have different levels depending on the play. Yeah, that is true. And I think someone said it earlier, talking about how great the histories are. And man, I agree. I think the histories are so underrated by everyone, because especially Henry IV Part 1, it's hilarious. It's so funny. It's essentially a comedy with political intrigue, and it's easy to stage. It's incredibly like engaging all the way through. And so I just think that I think more people should do it. I think more people should do histories. I said it.
So I could not be able to even begin to remember the name of it, but there was a webcomic I used to read where it was after the Lord of the Rings movies came out, and they clipped and took screenshots to fill full webcomic pages, and they did that as a D&D game. So each of it was the fun. I enjoyed it more than the Lord of the Rings movie. It was so much fun, and I was like, this is insane. So that at least exists. I wish I could remember the name. I read it in college, so it's been
yeah, that sounds awesome.
But it was really, really fun.
That sounds so cool. There's just something, I mean, obviously it's fantasy, and Macbeth is fantasy with murder. Like it's witches and magic and prophecies.
Yeah.
And murder and politics. It's all the things that D&D is.
Yep.
And I don't know. I love it. A Star Wars comic, Darths and Droids, is also really good.
Yes, I read that one too. Lost Limey, thank you. I loved that one because I think they started with like the prequel. It was just bonkers. But again, it took two things that I really, really liked. And those moments in the movies, like where something shouldn't have happened, or like someone just makes a great role or they make a terrible role, like the way that they fit. Oh, it was so good. It was so good. I'm just fangirl.
Yeah. DM of the Rings was the screenshot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Look at us collaborating.
I love it. I love it so much.
So, chat. Shakespeare art. If you've got questions, throw them in there. If you have strong feelings, also throw them in there.
Throw them in there.
If you have things that you've always wanted to know, our opinions on, throw them in chat. Because this is a place for a lot of love and strong opinions.
Yes, I have a lot of feelings. What up, Simkin? Hello. Drawing some witches.
The green coming out of the front witch's eyes feels very Loki to me. The way that the horns kind of swoop up.
Yep. I did not, Simkin, yet, because I'm bad at communicating, and I've been holed up in my house the whole day. Yes, you should send it to her or drop it in chat. Okay, so I am going to ask you a question, Steph.
Yes.
Because I'm debating. I really liked the idea that they mentioned like specific components of their spells, and I'm debating if I want to highlight certain parts of that in this last little like
Ooh.
panel I have over the side. So I was gonna have you pull the text back up so we can.
Yeah. Let's see. There we go. Ooh. So do you want to hear my favorite?
Yes.
My favorite ingredients? I love Scale of Dragon, Tooth of Wolf, Witch's Mummy, Maw, and Gulf. This is my favorite line of the series, of the whole series of ingredients. I think because it feels so classically witchy or classically Halloweeny, I guess.
Yeah.
Because like Scale of Dragon, like first of all, we've got like we're looking at magic and we've got this like mythical bit. Tooth of Wolf, again, it just has this really like feral feel to it. And then Witch's Mummy, Maw, and Gulf. So Witch's Mummy would be like a piece of like a mummified piece of flesh from a witch. And so like taking pieces of previous witches, because Maw is mouth, and then Gulf would be it's an organ. I want to say stomach, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Yeah, I should look that up. But like literal pieces of an old witch, adding that. So we've got this like really mythical element of the dragon scale. We've got this really like feral natural element of the tooth of a wolf. And then you have predecessor witches adding into the mix. And I just think that's really cool. So those are my favorite ingredients.
I like it.
You know what, Swan? I can't tell you the number of times I've read Macbeth and memorized and performed these lines. One of the first suggestions I give to people whenever they're reading anything Shakespeare, this is a trap of Trochaic Tetrameter. Every time I tell people to read Iabic Pentameter, I say read to the ends of sentences. Read to the punctuation. Don't read to the end of the line. And you know what? I've only read to the end of this line, and I haven't read to the punctuation. It's witch's mummy, so piece of mummified witch flesh, and then Maw and Gulf of the Raven Salt Sea Shark. It's not a witch's maw and Gulf. It's the Maw and Gulf of the Raven Salt Sea Shark. Y'all, we're all learning something today. And that something is how to read. I've never, because the rhythm is so musical and because this is a scene that you read in rhythm, Scale of Dragon, Tooth of Wolf, Witch's Mummy, Maw and Gulf of the Raven, Salt Sea Shark, Root of Hemlock, Digged in the Dark. I just never stopped to think, and because it rhymes as well, it's easier to fall into that trap. Y'all, we're only putting one part of a mummy witch in this cauldron. We're putting the stomach and mouth of a shark. Into this. My mind is blown. My mind is blown. Here we are. Maw and Gulf of the Raven Salt Sea Shark. Wow. I feel like a new and different person. Huh. Anyway.
Also, I love that they're calling out sharks. I feel like that's such, I don't know, for some reason that I don't feel like Shakespeare talks about sharks very much.
No. You don't feel like Jaws is a permanent part of Shakespeare inspiration.
I don't.
But yeah, wow. Anyway, I think this middle section, the second witch section, is probably the most famous. I'm not really sure why. I think it's because it has the most unique things, and like they're all kind of animal parts and maybe like classical witch ingredients, because you've got eye of newt, toe of frog, wool of bat, tongue of dog, adder's fork, blindworm sting, lizard's leg, howlet's wing. So I think that because there's just like a very quick sequential list of items, I feel like those are probably the most recognizable ingredients. But mummy flesh is my favorite. Listeners, what's your favorite witch ingredient?
Well, and I wonder too if because of this text and its influence on so many other people, do we then start to see more witch ingredients that pull from this type of stuff because that's what was mentioned and that's what people start to think, and then it perpetuates the idea of this is what witches do and this is what they use. And
yeah, I think so. I think that this is, and it's also, there's a lot of like Jacobean Elizabethan witch stuff happening. But yeah, there's a lot of modern association that with witches that comes directly from Macbeth. Lost Limey likes tongue of dog best. Our sweet puppy. Tongue of pug. Oh, tiny little.
Also, I want you to know I'm constantly having to fight the urge to just make the Sanderson sisters, because when I think of witches, like that's part of where my brain goes, and I just want Hocus Pocus because that's what I think of. But
it's really funny. This Halloween we watched. I grew up with Hocus Pocus, and Mike had never seen it before. And let me tell you, watching that movie, kind of putting yourself in the perspective of an adult human who's never seen it before and doesn't have any nostalgia associated with it, it is a bad movie. It is objectively terrible. I love it, and I will never not love it, but like,
yeah, watching it as an adult, there was one scene, I think it was one of the fights in the graveyard, where like the witch is coming at him, and I'm just like, this is a bad fight scene. Like, this just, it's not good. I remember it being real scary when I was a kid. It's not scary. Okay.
Yeah, Lost Limey, I don't necessarily recommend it as an adult, but since the sequel's coming out, give it a shot. It's always worth giving. Like, it's always weird, kind of, especially with that like really heavy nostalgia of the 90s. Like, it's tough to go back to it, but
yes,
still fun.
Honestly, though, like, and I never remember her name, and I am so embarrassed. But so Sarah Jessica Parker is fine, but like Bette Midler is just leaning in. Like, she's having so much fun, and the other woman, the third witch, whose name I can never remember, but I love her. Yes, and like she's wonderful in it. Like, and the Doug Jones, who always does all of the crazy like character acting, like he's the reanimated guy, like, so he's really good. So there's parts of it where you're just like, oh no, like these guys were having fun with this very silly movie.
Yes, absolutely. You can tell how much fun they are having. And they're like totally leaning into the camp of it, which is so fun.
Which also, I think it's funny because you talk about like the classics of Halloween horror, of which I will never watch, but you've got Halloween, you've got Freddy Krueger, you've got all of these things. Like, I don't always think that those movies are great movies, not just from my personal horror preferences, but they kickstarted something and they did a cool thing for the genre. So there's a reverence to them, even if they're not the best movies. And so I'm like, I kind of just lump Hocus Pocus in with that, even though it's not straight up horror, but.
So I want to go back to Lost Limey said, I think eye of newt, as well as being animal parts, is the nickname of a type of herb native to Scotland. And it's I want to say it's a seed, it's like a mustard seed. That eye of newt. Mustard seed. Egyptian pharaohs were buried with vessels full of seeds, and ancient Romans and Greeks mixed the seeds with vinegar for a flavorful sauce used on a variety of foods. A lot of these ingredients, or a lot of like animal part names were also associated with herbs or different I don't know, ritualistic like ingredients, like,
Yeah.
not a literal tongue of a dog, but there was probably like a leaf that looked enough like a tongue of a dog or something. And that's a really great and cool point to bring up, because yes, a lot of these could just be herbs, but like when we look at a scene like this, taking them at face value or at literal value just kind of leans into that archetype in such a fun way. And I think that the intention of naming all of these herbs animal parts, or animal parts of animals, if you overhear it, is like a really kind of, when you look at the misunderstanding of herbalists and them being witches, it kind of plays into that like evil incarnation of how they're portrayed, or how they're understood or misunderstood in their time period. So I think it's a really interesting thing to kind of dig into the implications of using these names rather than necessarily using plant or herbs names, because it does absolutely make them more monstrous and more removed from your mom who's making tea in the living room with tongue of dog, right? Like keeping them more removed from humanity, I guess.
Yes. And I also like the idea that with the magic element, that yes, it might be an herb or a plant or something, but through this, they're channeling the power of whatever creature they're talking about.
Oh, sure.
Or like there's even a transformation aspect to it. Like I always think of I know it's not a scary movie, but it scared me because I'm a weenie and I don't like horror. It was called Skeleton Key, but it had to do with like Southern voodoo. And there was this whole component to, you were kind of safe from it if you didn't believe in it. But as soon as the doubt crept into your head and you started believing in it, you started to become susceptible to it. And like that element in itself is very scary. So I feel like these witches are using this great evocative language that, yeah, it might just be some stones that look like teeth, or it might be your teeth. Like that kind of playing with your imagination and your heightened, so that it gets scarier, that it didn't start scary, but it's getting scarier.
I like that a lot. That's so fun to me, because like it reminds me Orpheus and Eurydice. As soon as doubt creeps in, and if any of you have listened to Hadestown, the whole end of the musical, spoilers, but it's a million-year-old myth, is when like you've got the fates singing about doubt creeping in, and like Orpheus is trying not to turn around, and then like just how tempting that doubt can be. So I think that's a really cool. I would like to watch that movie.
Yeah, because that is powerful. Like the doubt, the fear, that is almost the scarier thing. So, and again, because my imagination is crazy active, I could not separate me sitting watching the movie from the doubt and fear of it. So I just got scared and didn't want to watch anymore. But that's just me.
Mike and I watched a horror movie last night. The pitch of it sounded incredible. We were like all in. Okay. It's about Edgar Allan Poe, and somebody is murdering people in the ways of his stories, and only he can help catch the murderer. We were like, hell yes. Yes. Oh, it's so bad.
No.
John Cusack is playing Edgar Allan Poe. And it's
Okay.
like John Cusack playing Nick Cage playing Edgar Allan Poe. And you know how much I love Nick Cage. But yeah, Poe Facey. I swear it's the worst acted movie I've ever seen in my life. And maybe it's just because the writing was bad. Maybe it's just because everyone was making every choice under the sun. But oh my gosh, it should have been so great. There, he had a little raccoon pet. Edgar Allan Poe had a little Carl, his raccoon. And not even that could save the movie.
Oh no! Oh my gosh.
We had a great time.
Oh, but that sounds
Great time watching that movie.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah, it was
Also-
so awful. Also, I guessed the murderer in the first like 5 minutes after the first murder. I was like, oh, I bet it's this rando. And then it was, and I was like,
but I'm right, but I don't feel good about it.
I don't feel good about it. Yeah, the Raven is what it's called.
Oh, very shock. I could
Yeah.
have never guessed that.
It's super clever. It was so bad. I loved it so much. Horror's fun. Horror's fun, and I think that Elizabethan horror, like Shakespeare horror, is I feel like it's a hard thing to portray. Because the natural fear of witchcraft, I am not sure is as prevalent today as it was in Elizabethan times, like a witch is the worst thing you could be,
right?
And the idea of witchcraft was so yikes-a-roni that it just automatically instilled this oppressive fear. And I think that's why Macbeth was so popular, and that's one of the reasons that I've heard, the superstition of not saying Macbeth in a theater. One of the kind of origins of that, obviously there are a million different stories and a million different reasons, but one of them is because it was such a successful play that if your theater was struggling or your play was failing, they could just bring Macbeth in, and that would automatically sell tickets, recoup ticket sales, and your play would be dead. So don't mention Macbeth, it's gonna swoop in and take over the theater if we're not doing well enough, if we're not successful.
Interesting.
So yeah, and I know there's a lot of different, like I said, there's a lot of different justifications for that superstition, but that's my favorite one of the bunch, because I just love thinking of it as this such a sellout. It's always gonna sell out the audience. So if your play sucks, watch out, because Macbeth's coming to take over.
I really like that. So I wanted to ask you about that, but I never knew. I knew that there was a thing that you weren't supposed to say, but I did not know where you were not allowed to say it. So I'm happy for
it. Originated as you're not meant to say it in the theater. And there are some people who have kind of taken it to you never mention the name of the play ever. Which I will never balk at a superstition because I have my own, but I've never really adopted it. I'm super conscious of other people who are very serious about it and won't taunt them with it, because that's a dick move. But yeah, it's just one of those things that you can make all of the connections that you want. When we were announcing that we were doing Macbeth at my theater, we were in the middle of a run of Godspell, and after opening night, we had to cancel the second night of the show because our Judas, on the surface, our Judas got an eye infection and was temporarily blinded and couldn't perform that night.
Oh, jeez.
And everyone was like, oh, it's because we announced Macbeth. And I'm like, no, it's because Nick is a gosh darn idiot who put too much hair gel in his hair and sweat too much and let it run into his eyes and didn't wash his gosh darn face after the show. And it's his own gosh darn fault. It's not because we announced that we're doing Macbeth, y'all. Let's be real. He's an idiot. And that's why this has happened. Yeah.
So let us not discount this important part of he's an idiot.
Fate versus free will, baby.
That's really funny.
Yeah, it's but again, a million different origins of the myth and a million different reasons to respect those who won't say it, and also if you are not superstitious to not be.
Yeah.
That's your choice. God, makes me so mad thinking back on that. It's just so ugh. Like that was a decade ago. I shouldn't still be upset about it. Everyone blames me for having to cancel the second night of the show because we're doing a Shakespeare play. And yeah, Fofacey, that's like a condition of the superstition is that if you're performing the play, you're allowed to say the name of the play as much as you want because you can't perform Macbeth without saying Macbeth.
I was gonna say, there's a whole family about it. I felt like that was kind of an important part of dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I love with the decision. I was like, you know what I'm gonna draw a ton of today? Hands. Let's just
hands.
All the hands.
Is that something that you like steer away from typically, or?
So they are absolutely challenging. Even after practicing a ton, I teach how to draw them. They are a challenging thing because they are just weird. They move weird, they do weird things. Also, if you are to just draw something like exactly as you see it, like if I drew this as it was, it would look weird because our brains can interpret the 3D better from an actual 3D thing than on a 2D thing. So there are times where, yes, this is what I want the hand to do, but I have to change it because if I just draw it exactly as the photo is, it's going to look wrong. Even though if it's exactly like I just copied the picture, it still looks wrong. So there's a weird thing. So they don't bug me. There are certain times where I have good hand days and bad hand days. Today's a good hand day. But yeah, it's just funny to me because they are challenging, and they're one of those where if you don't get it right, it's a little bit more obvious.
Sure.
Because people are like, oh, that doesn't look like hands. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Is there something that you will avoid drawing? Like, if possible, you will never draw X.
I hate drawing cars. I hate it. I'm bad at it. And I laugh because I literally have an 8-page comic in an anthology where the entirety of the story takes place with 2 main characters driving through the desert of Las Vegas to go to a wedding chapel, and they're in a car the entire time.
Oh my god.
But the story was so good. I wanted to do it. So I had my pick of 3 stories, and that's the one I picked. And I was like, oh my gosh, I now have to draw cars for 8 pages. So yeah, given the option, I will try not to draw cars because I don't think they look good. Or I have to do much more extensive research to find a car in the position that I need it to be in because the structure just doesn't make sense to me.
Got it.
That's the big one. Yeah, that's the one where I'm just like, oh no.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
I guess you could like stylize your own version of a car and then just really like stick to that and be like, this is what in my world.
In my world,
what cars look like.
Yeah. Yep. No, usually they're ones where I'm like, oh, they're going to be in the background. They're just going to be blobs. Funny thing, it's a weird call out, but when I was doing art for Nook's Tavern, we did the Abbey Road cover.
Yeah.
Nooks with Animal Crossing characters. And I want you all, if you can go back and find the art for it, take a look at that. Look at how many cars Emily did not draw because there's a whole bunch where they're just blobs of color. And I was like, no, it's Animal Crossing. They don't have cars. Yeah, because I didn't want to draw cars. I was like, no, I hate it.
Honestly, like I absolutely respect not like if you don't want to draw an element, like doing everything you can to avoid using that. Because I'll do that on stage too. If there are like props that I know won't look good or, you know, like different, I don't know, like a direct parallel to drawing, but like there are definitely things that I will rework to avoid just the need for. We don't need that anymore. It doesn't exist in this version of the play.
Yeah. Oh, there's a whole bunch happening in chat that I'm not keeping up on.
So the real person's name is Macbethland MacFinlech. Yeah, I've read a lot about the historical inspirations for Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And I love the idea of Shakespeare just taking this like decent king and being like, nope, we're making you a bad guy.
But what if?
But what if you were a big dumb idiot? Everyone always says, for as much as I refuse to support J.K. Rowling anymore, Harry Potter houses have been a staple of my childhood and my life for 20 years. So my favorite thing to do would be to sort Shakespeare characters. Obviously, totally natural thing to do. And I love when people try to tell me that like Macbeth is a Slytherin. I'm like, you're so wrong. You couldn't be more wrong. Macbeth is
count the ways you're wrong.
Textbook Gryffindor. He's dumb. He's strong. He's gonna run face first into something someone dared him to do and not think about the consequences that would pose afterwards.
Well, and isn't it, there's a pride element to it too with him, I feel like. So, and there's a huge pride element to Gryffindor.
Yeah, the ego is strong with the Gryffindors. So I always like, he doesn't think about, my favorite thing to talk about with Macbeth is how the play goes south as soon as Macbeth stops listening to his wife. Like, as soon as they are literally on the top of the world, if he keeps listening to Lady Macbeth, they would stay there. Mm-hmm. But like, it's as soon as he started doing things on his own without consulting his wife, it's when he kills Banquo. It's when he kills Macduff's kid. That's when everything goes to heck. Like, just listen to your wife, man. Just keep listening to her. I know you did a murder and it's bad, but like, could have been fine if you didn't be a man about it. That's my hot take for Macbeth. Mackers. Captain Mac. I don't know what that is.
Well, I feel like if you're going to push a parallel to that with the I don't know, like you said, not necessarily feminist play, but the criticism of someone having hubris and stuff like that, but also neglecting the teamwork that you get of having a husband and wife team. And so you want to talk about like you not being able to accept the smarts of your partner, so you fail.
Yeah, my favorite thing is there's a theater in England that's like announced maybe a month ago, we're gonna do a feminist Macbeth, and I'm like, girl, how? How? Unless Macbeth and Macduff are both played by women, which actually the Show Must Go Online did an all-female and non-binary Macbeth last year online, and it was amazing because getting to see all women in these parts, all women and non-binary actors, like that brought just a new power dynamic to the whole thing. It was very, very cool. Very cool to watch. So I suggest that if you're looking for a new Macbeth to watch.
Well, I feel like the part of it where is the lesson is the hubris, is the foolish decisions that they make. And it doesn't matter which type of human is making those decisions. Like, you fail because you made bad choices, not because
you stopped communicating.
Yep. That is why you fail.
That is why Macbeth fails. Poor dumb dummy. Big sword, big head, little
brain.
Yeah.
Little brain.
Oh man, I love the look of this. I love that it looks like almost like tentacles.
Yeah.
I love that. I love seeing magic, like not personified, but magic.
It's just fun to draw. It is fun to, because and it never looks the same, even when it looks similar, and you can do different things with it. And
it has so much movement.
Yeah, which I love.
So much movement.
I think also, to go back to a question you asked me earlier, so I don't love drawing very geometric stationary things. So cars and buildings and perspective. It's a lot of very straight lines. I like organic things. I like flowy, wiggly lines and all of that. And I think that it literally leads into is like, no, I'll draw hair, I'll draw magic, I'll draw all of these like flowing capes and stuff because they have movement to them that appeals to me. So yeah, it's a big part of that. It's just like, no, this is just fun.
Yeah. Also, the shark head is making me so happy. Just like this big shark mouth feels so anachronistic somehow, even though it's literally in there. Like it feels like a horror movie poster.
Yeah, I was really proud of this like mummified face. Like, I know it's not exactly that, but it felt just ominous enough where it's not totally bad, but it's not totally good, which I like. Again, I like that.
I love this panel. I love the top of it, just like it's such a mood. And I know we've talked about on the stream a ton about like setting the mood and setting the tone of a page. But it just, the way that, again, it's magic to me. The way that you've like almost just blurred out the fog. And so I can see behind it. Like I can see behind, and it blows my mind because that's like a 3D thing. I see fog and then I see a person behind it. But in your 2D art, I see fog and I see the shape behind it. And it's just like absolutely blowing my mind. I can't, I don't know. It's just so cool to me, but it has this like really ominous tone throughout, and the green of the magic being the lighting. Like I just think it's very cool.
Yeah, but this one was a lot. This was just fun. This one was very fun to play with.
Yeah. Y'all, this has been awesome.
It was super, super fun.
Today's been so great. I've loved having some Shakespeare nerds in the chat.
Yes. That was awesome.
Come be on my podcast.
Yes. If you want to yell about Shakespeare, I know a podcast for you.
Yeah. Get in touch. What's up? It has been so great, Swan. I love this. I love this stream. Thank you all for joining us today. Macbeth is one of my favorite plays, and so getting to see these witches in all of their magical glory has been so cool. Thank you for your creativity, your originality, always. Faux Facey, it is called Protest Too Much.
At P2M Pod across the internets.
There you go, Swan. You're so prepared. Yeah, basically, I have a guest come on and we choose. Right now, we're in villain season. So someone will, like, the episode I just recorded last night that I still can't get over is Anthony, who's the DM for Adventure Incorporated, the D&D podcast that I'm on. He and I are doing a Survivor stream every month. So we watch a season of Survivor, and then we do an alternate reality stream on the first Friday of each month. We did a what villain would win Survivor episode, which is coming out on Thursday. And awesome. So like, yeah, he gets to bring both sides of the argument. So my guest gets to punk me with whoever I have to improvise an argument for. And usually I'm just like, well, this is great.
There's been some doozies this season. Like, people have been rough on you.
Yeah. Last week, my guest gave me King John. And spoiler alert, I've never read King John. I don't know anything about it. Did a great job. Great job. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, it's fun, but I'm always looking for guests. So if y'all are interested, y'all are in the Doodle Crew Discord?
Some of them, yes.
Okay.
Steph is also there. So
yeah. I lurk.
And
I look at your art.
Yeah.
Awesome. Swan.
Yeah. Hey. Aw, thanks. This is so fun. I love doing this. I love talking about art. I love getting to make art. I love having it explained to me, which sounds really silly, but it's cool to have someone who has read this and understands it to a level of which I don't, because I haven't ever read it. So I get to get cool interpretations from that, which influence the art. So it's super, super fun.
Yeah, this is the best. Yeah. what is coming up for Doodle Crew?
Doodle Crew. So Doodle Crew is currently on hiatus, but that doesn't mean there's no content. So if you follow me across the internet, everything is a Swan named Emily, but specifically on YouTube. From when we went on to hiatus, which was the beginning of July, until the end of September, every Friday there is going to be a Doodle Crew interview released. So if you actually want to hear the artists that I have on that show, the amazing, amazing people who are like, yeah, we'll do live art with you, talk about their creative process, how they manage their life as an artist or their life as something else with art on the side, all of that. Like every week you get an interview with a different artist, which is super, super cool because we share a lot of things, but we've all had very different creative journeys, which sounds a lot more profound than it actually is, but it's cool. And it's what's neat about having a group of artist friends and adult friends. So my hope is always with this, like anybody who's a young creator or trying to figure out what it's like to be an adult artist, here's a whole bunch. There's like 10 different people who all make art their own way. And that's really dope. So I'm super excited. I love the Doodle Crew. They bring me so much joy and so much life and so much creative like freedom and support, which is dope. So you can also follow us at Doodle Crew Draw across the internets if you want to see the art that these amazing people create. So,
and
yay!
If you want more of me and Swan, which who wouldn't, In Addition happens every Wednesday night, twitch.tv/naddpod, Wednesdays at 8/7 Central. We talk about everything. We take topics that you give us. If you have something you want us to talk about, we talk about everything. Snacks was the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah, we talk about food a lot.
We
So
do.
if you have specific foods you want to hear us talk about, we can absolutely do that. But I love it because we'll balance like a whole topic about food with then a whole topic about like how do you mentally assess when you are at your breaking point? And then we'll go back to like, hey, how do you road trip? So it's a good time.
It's a variety of things. It's very fun. It's the two of us and Mike and Tony Pate. And it's a great time. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for watching. And we'll see you all next month. If you've got Shakespeare passages that you want to see Swan draw,
yes,
send them to us and we will
please
do them. Bye, y'all.
Thanks. Bye.